Hello and welcome to the President's Podcast. Welcome back to the Views the News Excludes. Of course, on the record with the Ohio Senate. I am your host, John Fortney. I'm the Director of Communication with the Republican Caucus in the Ohio Senate, the Majority Caucus. Joining us, as always, Ohio Senate President Matt Huffman with a very special guest today. Everybody will know him based on his legacy and time in the legislature, former member of the Ohio Senate, now State Representative Bill Seitz, Republican from Cincinnati, Ohio. Welcome. Great to have you.
Delighted to be with you, John.
You know, Mr. President, when you think about legendary members of the Ohio General Assembly over the last few decades, you think Vern Rife, you think Dick Finan, you think Bill Batchelder. Bill Seitz is known for legendary floor speeches and really such a legendary institutional knowledge of the General Assembly.
Yeah, I got to say two things about Bill, but really what it is most about is knowing so much about so many different issues. And I think there's a reason for that, and I'll get to it. In 2007, in my first couple of weeks in the House of Representatives, Bill came into my office, sat down, and I just kind of knew him from meeting him the last month or so before, and he gave me the Healthcare Simplification Act, House Bill 125, and he said, I think you could do this. Well, it turned into about a 14-month journey, and really once I did that, it was sort of like boot camp in legislation, and that's really how I learned to get a bill, to fashion it, to make compromises, to get both sides to come in, really under the mentorship of Bill. And that's what a lot of people in the public ask good legislators to do. There's a sign or a song by a group called 10 Years After. And there's a line in that song, which Bill once quoted to me, I think he was actually singing when he said it to me, which says, I'd like to change the world, but I don't know what to do, so I'm leaving it up to you. That's right. And so that's what people do, is not just folks out there, but legislators too, who come to Bill and say, how am I going to do this? And you partner with a lot of different types of legislators, both sides of the aisle, conservative, liberal, whatever it is, to get something done.
Yeah, well, Matt, I really appreciate that, and that is what we are supposed to do. We are supposed to pay it forward. The person that preceded Matt in the General Assembly was a fine fellow named John Wilimowski, who mentored me. And so when he left to become a judge, I said, well, pay it forward. Try to help some other bright young legislator learn the ropes. And I've done that for my whole 24 years, really without fear or favor as between the parties. I've worked with Democrats, I've worked with Republicans, I've worked with conservative Republicans, I've worked with more liberal Republicans. This is what the legislative process is really all about, getting good legislation done, paying it forward, developing good collegial relations with all of our colleagues as much as we can, recognizing that we have our principles and we're not always going to agree, but we don't need to be nasty about it, and we do need to be forward-thinking in how we go about getting good stuff done in Ohio. And Lord knows you and I have done plenty of it in the last 15 or so years.
Yeah, well, one of the things, though, about you is you appear, and I think it's genuine, you appear to be fearless about everything that you're doing. And that's not, there are a lot of legislators who say, well, you know, I'm for you, but I'm not going to be for you until I have to be for you, or this is the way I feel. And I mean, is it the lawyer in you, or is it the Cincinnati in you, or exactly what is it?
Yeah, you know, I'd say lawyers are better prepared to be good legislators because our background is in reading and understanding the law.
He's an old antitrust lawyer.
An old antitrust lawyer. And so in that respect, yes, that helps. But I really think all people around here want, whether it's the lobbying community or anybody else, they want to know where you stand. Give me a yes, give me a no. They're not going to be offended if the answer is no. What gets them offended is if you're saying yes to you today and no to you tomorrow, then you get caught up in your own lies. So I've always gone to sleep at night with a clear conscience, because I've told the same thing to everybody all day long. Mm-hmm. And I've had this little motto in the back of my head for my whole legislative career. I like to argue like John Calhoun and compromise like Henry Clay. I mean, really, and when you think about it, I've done that.
So 132 legislators, how many on the 132 know who both of those guys are, would you say?
Well, that is.
See, now you don't want to offend your fellow legislators.
I
Well,
don't-
term limits. I mean, this is one of the things, institutional knowledge has been lost through term limits.
Yeah, and I'm sure if we went to the folks of Lima or the folks in suburban Cincinnati, term limits would still pass with an overwhelming majority, but
Sure.
in all honesty, it's not been a good thing. It's empowered lobbyists, it's empowered the executive branch. The executive branch can say, you'll be here 8 years, I'll be here long after you're here.
That's right.
I'm gonna stick my head in the sand and ignore you.
Yeah.
And how many times have we seen us pass legislation,
Yeah.
only to find 2 years later, the General Assembly or the executive branch still hasn't done it.
Right.
We've been trying to get them to develop fracking in our parks responsibly
Right.
for 10 years.
Yeah.
And we still don't have a lease signed.
Yeah.
So term limits is not the panacea that the public thinks it is. But absent a big constitutional amendment, which I don't see in the cards, we're faced with term limits. And I've been fortunate to be able to come to the Senate and then go back to the House.
Yeah.
My proudest achievement in all these years has been serving as majority leader under 6 different speakers of the House, most of whom didn't really like one another. Somehow or another, I was saved. I feel a little bit like the Israelites, where they put the blood above the mantle, and the angel of death crossed over my door. But I think it's because people value institutional knowledge, and we need more of it around here.
We're going to miss it when, for those of you who may not know, Representative Seitz announced that he was going to be retiring at the end of his term. And this is the loss of institutional knowledge, not just service in the legislature, but isn't it important as well, because both of you came out of local government? You were at the municipal level. People would come in, didn't like their taxes, didn't like how things were annexed. I mean, doesn't this contribute to a good state lawmaker?
Yeah, I mean, I just was mentioning somebody at the end of this year, I will have been in the General Assembly 15 years, and I was on the Lima City Council for 15 years also. So it's not only that, but as Bill mentioned, it is practicing law when you have the kind of practice that we have, where you're dealing with multiple clients and multiple issues, often disappointment, and you have to be forthright with your clients about what's going to happen. And I think that's great training for what we do. And someone else, well, is that the best training to be a legislator? Well, I think other great training is being married, having children, being one of 9 children. Those are all life skills that you develop, and you compromise, and you do good things. So I think all of that's important. But Bill's absolutely right. Term limits empower the bureaucracy. I mean, I've had the people frankly say, well, you'll be gone in 2 years, or you'll be gone, or I don't work for you, I work for somebody else. I'm not as pessimistic as Bill is about getting rid of term limits. Some other pretty conservative states who had them got rid of them. But it's just something that, you're right, it would have to take a statewide campaign, and we know how hard it is to win those. So.
Sure is. But the local government training, John, as Matt said, is very, very important. I mean, I'm from the old school. You work your way up from being on your neighborhood community council and a local precinct executive to maybe, like I did, a school board stint on an urban school board.
Oh, thankless.
Toughest job I ever had in politics, I guarantee you that, is being a Republican on an urban school board. Township trustee, and then come on up here. It really is good background training. We need more of that up here. We need more lawyers, to be candid. And the reason lawyers are so important, besides the fact that we write laws, 90-some% of the civil cases that we try or that we get involved with are settled.
Right.
That means you learn the art of settlement. Mm-hmm. And as I've said for years, being in the State General Assembly is like being in a year-long mediation session where the issues change every day.
Right.
So you have to be supple and flexible, but you always have to be driving the outcome towards some sort of an acceptable settlement of very complicated issues.
Yeah, it's even harder really with legislature, because with practicing law, if you can't settle it, then a judge is going to decide for you. And there is no judge at the end of this. We just have to work it out. Now, on a couple of occasions, as president of the Senate, I've looked at sort of the different factions, and I said, you guys decide how you want this to be, and if you don't, I'll settle it for you. And that drives settlement among those different factions. But it's important, we have, and Bill's been in both bodies, we'll have a dry erase board up here with 40 or 50 issues. Well, the speaker wants that. Well, the president wants that. Well, that's the way. Okay, can we agree? And you go through those.
Right.
We had a good meeting this time around down at one of the local diners trying to get a number of things.
You and I
out.
did. We certainly did. And this budget that we just concluded, I mean, what a successful way for me to end on my last general operating budget.
When you came into the GA, when you
Right.
came into the General Assembly, how many tax brackets roughly were there?
We had 9 tax brackets. Our maximum Ohio income tax was around 8%. We had a corporate income tax that we've since abolished. We had a tangible personal property tax that we've since abolished. We've reduced the state income tax burden to now we only have 2 tax brackets. The maximum tax bracket is 3.5%. Everybody making less than $100,000 pays only 2.75%, and the people making less than $26,000 pay a big fat zero. That's remarkable progress on the tax front. But there's been equally great progress culminating in this last budget on the whole issue of education funding.
Another $1 billion.
Another $1 billion. We put money behind the public schools to bring into effect the fair school funding formula. It's a 6-year phase-in of a formula that even the teachers' unions agreed would make our school funding formula constitutional. We did that, but we also expanded school choice so that now we have universal school choice. When I started back in 2001, we just had the Cleveland Scholarship Program as a pilot program whose constitutionality had not yet even been determined by the U.S. Supreme Court. Now we've taken that so far down the road, and I'm very pleased with that too, because we're giving kids in Ohio meaningful choices between the public schools, well-funded, the parochial and private schools, funded with vouchers, charter and community schools, technical schools. We believe in education for everybody. It doesn't have to be a fight between the publics and the privates. We believe in choice and good education for all our kids. And I know, Matt, you believe that, and I know I believe that too, because that was a big subject of discussion during our budget discussions.
Well, no, I mean, not just this time, but over the past 15 years.
That's right.
And the answer is in a lot of places, especially where I live in small rural towns, everybody goes to the public school. There are no private schools. Go to a place like Coldwater or Russia, Ohio, and it really is I was in Russia recently, and the gentleman there said, he was in his late 80s, he said, 40% of the kids K-12 in this school are descendants of my grandfather. So it's a family, almost a family operation. I think up at Coldwater, they still let the kids out early for mass on holy days of obligation. So it really is about communities, and things are different in Mercer County than they are in downtown Columbus. And that's why different options, different ways of doing things have to be available to everybody.
You mean parents aren't the enemy?
I don't think we in the Republican Party believe that parents are the enemy, okay?
Yeah.
But
I would say this. It is true that there are people certainly working in public schools who are experts, who are going to do great things for kids, and it doesn't mean every parent makes the right decision every time, but we have to default to that because it is first about parents and families and communities that are raising these kids.
You know, one thing Ohio and the country, up until just a few years ago, seemed to be very, very well positioned in energy independence. That's something you were talking a little bit about. What do you think needs to happen to really position Ohio to be truly energy independent, regardless of what the federal government does?
Well, the federal government has been putting a lot of wind in our face. And we have policies coming out of the Biden administration that have restricted pipeline development, fracking development, oil and gas exploration. All of these things have only emboldened our enemies in Venezuela, in Iran, in Russia, etc., and Saudi Arabia to jack up the price of oil. This is terrible. We in Ohio have done our level best to keep our coal and nuclear plants open. Thank God we did, because if we hadn't, 2 days before Christmas last year, the state of Ohio would have been in a brownout situation thanks to Winter Storm Elliott. The fact of the matter is, we did that against a lot of headwinds from the environmental left who didn't want to keep coal plants around, who didn't want to keep nuclear plants around. Thank God we did. We declared natural gas to be a form of renewable energy. It certainly is. If you look at any sanitary landfill in Ohio, they have recapture facilities for all the methane gas that's bubbling up from the garbage, and combined cycle gas plants are a necessary ingredient for wind and solar power, because when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, you need dispatchable, reliable power to back it up. That comes mostly from our combined cycle natural gas plants. We have done our level best, but we're in a 13-state consortium called PJM. And many of those states are following Biden blue state policies. Right. So we have demand going like very up, thanks to things, economic successes like Honda, like Intel, like the onslaught of electric vehicles, all these great successes. That's going to drive electric demand up. And we have baseload power plants declining and retiring at a rapid rate, more rapid than was predicted. FERC has said this is a problem. PJM has said in a few short years, we will be out of reserve capacity. That means brownouts, folks. So responsible plans to tamp down demand and increase supply have got to be what this is all about. And maybe it's time to have a serious conversation about how we go about incentivizing the construction of new baseload plants here in the state of Ohio, because we've lost an awful lot of them, and we cannot count on wind and solar to make up that gap until they solve the problem of storage when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine.
Right.
So far, they haven't done.
Yeah.
That's a big issue also in your district.
Yeah, well, and you know, I people kind of know where I stand on it. I was driving home from watching my Notre Dame Fighting Irish take it right at the last minute from the Buckeyes, and great win for Ohio State, but we were holding our stomachs as we walked out. But if you come home from South Bend through Fort Wayne and you're driving on Route 30, if you look off to the south, it's a beautiful night. It's out in the countryside, things that folks living in rural communities have lived with all their life. If you look off to the left, it's the War of the Worlds. There are over the whole horizon, there are red blinking lights, and it really has ruined the countryside. I think there's a couple of hundred so, you know, folks, you know, it's not for me, it's for thee, as we know. People don't want to have those, say, around the Ohio State campus, right? Well, we wouldn't do that. We're not going to put them in Upper Arlington or in Indian Hill, but out in Van Wert County, well, they're a bunch of hicks anyway, so we don't care about that. So I do not think that windmills and, frankly, solar panels are the future for energy. We're talking about hydrogen and the different kinds of hydrogen. I had to comment.
And we should be talking about small modular nuclear, too.
Well, I was just going to say that, but of course he's smarter and faster than I am. Because look, if you can build a nuclear power plant that will run a submarine or an aircraft carrier, why can't you do that to run the Ford plant in Lima or the Intel plant?
Right.
That's, and those are, you can build it there, you can build them somewhere and transport them there. And of course, there are a lot of folks, and you know, I'm not naive about it. I don't think Bill is. There are people who are pushing the things that they're pushing, as they always are, because they're in the business. Our lobbyist friends here don't come to us to give us the full story. They're there to give us the story that helps their client. Same thing that Bill and I do as lawyers. We don't go in and argue both sides of the case in court. We argue our client's side. So we as legislators need to know that. So. You know, there were folks ladling out gasoline to people in 1905 in downtown Lima. That was a bad idea. So we changed how we drive cars, how we power things. You know, we're not using whale blubber anymore. We're not using kerosene. And in 50 years, we're not going to be using solar panels and windmills. And now somebody will have to figure out how to take all those windmills down and what to do with all of those blades. But
waste, right?
I'd rather get to the future sooner than later.
Well, on nuclear, real quick on nuclear. We passed a resolution a couple of years ago in the House and the Senate calling on the federal government to change the permitting process for nuclear. Because right now, if you just want to put in one of those small nuclear reactors like power a nuclear sub, the permitting process takes just as long, thanks to federal regulations, as if you were building another 3 Mile Island. That's why it's not happening. Our federal friends have got to get off their duffs and start getting these processes moving along, like we've done in Ohio with the legislation requiring a reduction in the number of regulations,
Right.
speeding up agency decision timelines. We've done all this in Ohio.
Yeah.
The feds are lagging way behind.
Oh, but it's about the children. It's about it's about the children and green energy and the environment
Well.
and clean air. And I've said to a few media outlets in the past that really the only thing green that the environmental left is concerned about is the money. And if you can't sustain the base load power grid, then it's not worth all the additional investment until you can.
Yeah, well, and that's why I say, we drilled a lot of holes in the ground to get oil out of the ground, especially in places like Lima, Ohio, and that's why University of Findlay or the Findlay Oilers and John Rockefeller built his first refinery in Lima. It's the oldest continuously operating refinery in the United States. A little bit of trivia there
That's
for you,
great.
Bill, if you ever
Good
get to know
stuff.
that. But we also have about 5,000 orphan wells that we dug, and that's an aftermath of a policy that didn't look into the future about what are we going to do. Well, 50 years from now, this is Matt Huffman's prediction, I probably won't still be around, but we are going to be modular nuclear power plants, things that are environmentally friendly. Of course, we have to make sure that they're safe, that don't produce carbon gas, that don't ruin somebody's skyline, all of those kinds of things. And I don't know enough about to talk about hydrogen, except people who want to make money off of selling hydrogen and hydrogen technology are coming to talk to me about it. So and let me just say this. I'm a practicing lawyer in West Central Ohio. I'm not as smart as an antitrust lawyer from Cincinnati. We both went to the same law school, however. And I know a lot about my business. I'm not going to know about these energy issues, but I kind of have to act like a judge. And I know a lot more in 2023 than I did in 2007 about these, because I know what PJM means, and I've been through these different things. And that is the value, in my case, of having somebody who's been here 15 years, not as long as Bill. So.
Well, you're right. And one thing I will say on this whole energy discussion, there are unfortunately very few members of the General Assembly that have taken the time to study these very complicated issues, okay? And that's a shame, because the chairman of our Public Utilities Committee now in the House, Dick Stein, is term limited out. I'm term limited out. We're trying to bring some new people along. I have a great relationship with Senator Lang, one of your good colleagues.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Trying to bring him up to speed.
Yeah.
Representative Monica Blaisdell is doing a great job trying to learn in the House. But these are complicated issues, and I'm not going to drop the dime on any of my colleagues at all. But some of these issues require an awful lot of research and thinking. They're not the easy hot button issues about, God and guns and transgenders and bathrooms, and all those things are important and, easily grasped. But the hard work is done on the hard issues. The hard issues like overregulation, public utility policy, energy policy, tax policy. These are the hard issues, and that's where we need folks to be willing to roll up their sleeves and do it.
And not cave to the left.
And not
that
cave to
says,
the left.
You're not doing enough to clean up the air, while this country has done more since the 70s
Correct.
to clean up the environment than Russia and China,
Correct.
by far.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with all this worldwide global admissions nonsense, because India and China are just thumbing their nose at us, figuratively, if not actually, and it's all a joke. And then they go jetting off to Davos on their jets and complain about global carbon emissions. I mean, we can do these things in the United States with our free market system that becomes and stays energy independent. We were energy independent under Donald Trump, and we are no longer.
Yeah, I just to change the subject slightly. So when I finished in the House, or I was in the House, I was the majority leader,
Yes.
and Lou Blessing was the Speaker Pro Tem. And so I was in the House with Lou Blessing the whole time, first 6 years I was there. And Lou Blessing knew something, or perhaps everything, about everything that we talked about.
He'd been there a long time.
And he'd been there a long time. And so we got to the end of 2012, and I looked at Lou and I said, is there some way that you can stick around? I don't mean as a lobbyist, but could we hire you like for policy staff? And I don't mean that you're going to have to go to all the committee meetings, but it would be great to have you sitting here and say, well, here's why we do it that way. And he kind of laughed, the Lou Blessing laugh that he has. Bill, his son Bill, has the same laugh, by the way. And he's enjoying a fine career and all of that. But and frankly, I had the same conversation with John Eklund, and he's
Another
of course
great
on the Court of
American.
Appeals now. You know, smart guy. And I guess I'm thinking the same thing for Bill Seitz. How is it that we keep Bill Seitz engaged in the truth-telling business in the legislature beyond the end of 2024?
That's a very good question. I have 14 months left. I have a lot of bills on my plate. I'm doing my part still to mentor our newer members of the House. They are coming to me, and I am giving them my all and my comments, and I'm doing that right up until the last bell. And what happens after that, I don't know. But it certainly is not news that I'm at the end of term limits. It certainly is not news that I would not run against my good friend Bill Blessing, who is our current senator, who is doing a great job.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm just an honorable person. But just because you're not in the General Assembly doesn't mean that you're dead. Hopefully I won't be dead. And so we'll see what the future holds. But it's been a great run, and I've gotten to know a lot of great people. Both Matt and I knew Bill Batchelder really well, and great Americans like Lou Blessing and Lou Terhar and John Eklund, and I sure miss them all. But the institution goes on. We just need to be sure we're constantly recruiting people that have the interests of the institution at heart.
You talked a little bit about the changes to education and the more options for parents and the additional $1 billion, kind of an all-in approach.
Right.
Also, with education, a realignment of the structure of who answers to whom.
Yep.
How important was that with Senate Bill 1 and part of the budget to have the restructuring to the Department of Education and Workforce and the restructuring of what the duties of the state school board are?
Yeah, I mean, that was a very controversial issue, John and Matt, but I was for it, argued for it. The fact of the matter is our state school board had become nothing but a debating society that really wasn't accomplishing anything, and getting a better focus to that mission was a good idea. Leaving them with the powers that all the other agencies have in respect of discipline and accreditation and those things. They'll still do that.
Yeah.
But the policy issues will be driven through the executive branch with the advice and consent of the Senate. That's a good thing. There's a good bill that's pending over in our chamber now that came from over here that deals with our colleges and universities. I've been working almost daily with Senator Serino and Representative Tom Young, who chairs the House committee. We hope to get that passed in some form or fashion in the near future. We are working on a philosophical framework to make our universities more responsive to the needs of today's in-demand jobs. We are working on a framework to get the universities focused on teaching real subjects and get them out of the woke agenda in which too many of them have become engaged. And we are working on realigning our K-12 system to match up with the jobs that are in demand today, for employers that are looking for workers. That's a huge problem. We've got all these great economic opportunities in Ohio that are coming.
Yeah.
And if you talk to employers, they all say, where are we going to get the people to work here?
Yeah.
It's a terrible problem. So that's what we're trying to do. And given our record over the last few years, I think we'll get there. Don't you?
Last few years, that's right. No, I part of it, I mean, you can kind of segment off the different groups that aren't there for these jobs. And there are some, Bill and I have talked about this, that we have over-criminalized our revised code over the last 25 or 30 years. Bill and I talked about the things that are now felonies used to be misdemeanors, and the things that are misdemeanors used to not be illegal. Your people are in prison longer for doing what 30 years ago it was different. Those people have become almost unemployable. We have expanded public benefits to discourage a lot of people from going back to work. Obviously, we need a safety net, but not something that discourages work. And then the cost of higher education is keeping some people in debt and now discouraging people from going to school. So we have to reorient this. There's not a special tag that you get on your shoulder that says, I went to college and you didn't. In fact, frankly, in the 12th Senate District in Western Ohio, there's lots of folks that saying, I'm not giving those people my money because,
I could
right?
be a welder and make six figures a year at the age of 20 years old.
Sure, and so it's small. They're small businessmen. They're farmers. Their families owned a farm for 6 generations. Why do they need to go to college? And that's bad when people think that college is a bad place to go. If you're going to go be a mechanical engineer or a lawyer or a doctor, that's all great. So these folks are all segments of society that need to be in the workforce with the proper training, and we need to make that all available to them.
This week, you were part of it. We held the Ohio Public University Trustee Symposium on governance. Watch 2 of our videos, one on protecting intellectual diversity from a very esteemed panel and very revealing, eye-opening comments from them. But also you talked about the mission of empowering trustees to understand that the president and the faculty work for the people of Ohio. The trustees are the boss of the university. And this is top down from what it costs, student loans, and trying to make sure that Ohioans are getting the most out of their public education.
Yeah, so we have 14 public four-year institutions, I think 22 community colleges, and they're all governed by a board of trustees appointed by different things. In this case, the governor appoints and the Senate confirms. Well, these jobs, in case of Ohio State, I think it's a $9 billion a year operation at Ohio State. They don't get paid anything. They don't have a staff. The only information that they get is from the people who they're exercising their authority over.
Here, sign this.
Yeah, and you know, as one of the guys said, he's actually a local lobbyist, I respect him a great deal, said, last meeting I sat down, they gave me 1,100 pages, they said, we need to vote on this today. Well, that's not authority. You're not exercising any control. Now, maybe you get free tickets to the football game. And some of the trustees are fine with that. Most of the trustees that were there Monday were the people who are saying, this is bad, we need to change this. And so what we're trying to do is give them tools and actually to empower the presidents, because often the presidents feel like their hands are tied. They're dealing with faculty members who've been there 30 or 40 years and feel like they're controlling the institution. And in fact, this is like a board of directors at a bank or a company or even, you know, a local not-for-profit. They're responsible for this. So, you know, one of the things we suggested was let's have an office that with an executive director and staff that works directly for the board of trustees. Well, what's that like? That's like all the people who work for the legislature. We have LAs, we have policy people, we have the Legislative Service Commission. Boards of trustees and universities don't have any of that. No. They just walk in and say, what's my job today?
But they're supposed to be the boss.
They're supposed to be the boss. And so empowering them is part of the objective of the program. And you know, it's a very prestigious thing to be able to say, I'm on the board of trustees of the Ohio State University or the University of Cincinnati.
Well, that's more prestigious.
Well, you and I would agree on that. But still in all, they've tended to look at it as just a prestige thing. And they need to start looking at it as in a new light. You are where the buck stops. You need to provide some greater guidance because we put you there because you are responsible business people, philanthropists, responsible people in the community. Use that authority, and if we need to give you resources to use it, we should do it.
Yeah, that's right.
Before I let you both go, during your time working together, whether you were in the same chamber or the different chambers, how about a great story, something that you will tell your grandchildren, or you'll spin a tale about, you know, over an adult beverage at some point, whether it was a late night, whether it was budget related.
I don't think we want to tell the best stories, do we?
No, we don't want to tell the best stories.
Well, I'll take a mediocre story.
No, we don't want to tell the best stories. Well, I will. We just went through this with the redistricting mess.
Oh, yes.
And this was the one time, I think, when we were a little bit on opposite sides of the question, because it was a cold December night when the Ohio Senate voted to put that thing on the ballot for the voters to consider how to go about redistricting for state General Assembly offices. And me being old school, I was of the view that this is not a good idea. We're doing this at 4 a.m. I said there's too many weasel words in this thing. In the hands of a liberal judiciary, we could be on the short end of a series of bad decisions. But when the vote was taken in the Ohio Senate, it was 32, put it on the ballot, and one, Bill Seitz, no thank you, I don't want to do it. I have the satisfaction of saying, with hindsight, I told you so. I tried to tell you that this was not a very good idea. But nonetheless, we did it. And nonetheless, after a lot of fits and starts, we ended up in a pretty good place. And now we have to make common cause against this ridiculous Rube Goldberg contraption of a independent redistricting commission that our former Chief Justice is trying to foist on the Ohio people.
When you remove all of the special interest groups from out of state, the NDRC, Eric Holder's group, I like to call them, all to undermine Ohio, or unfair districts, or the League of Liberal Misinformation, when you remove them from the process, President Huffman, it worked exactly the way it was supposed to work.
Right.
This
You named it right.
7-0
It did,
vote.
finally.
Right. Well, yeah, that's, so I'm going to give my rebuttal.
Yes,
to
yes.
Bill's previous remarks, which first of all, we disagreed on, and we've disagreed on a number of things through the years.
In a friendly way.
In a friendly way, and that's exactly it. And if you can have somebody like Bill Seitz on the other side of the argument, we always say, you know, when we're practicing law, I'd rather have a good lawyer on the other side. That's how you get cases worked out. If you get a lawyer who doesn't know what they're doing, you fight about everything, and you go to trial about everything. But you get a good lawyer, you get things worked out. And so when he was describing that just now, I thought he'd say, so Huffman had the satisfaction of being able to say, I told you so, because they just voted 7-0.
You did, ultimately.
Once the judiciary backed out of it, because you know, the constitutional amendment says Supreme Court is not to be drawing districts or even a map itself, which they attempted to do by backing into it last year. Right. The series of incentives and penalties kicked in, and they went, okay, I'll do this, you do that, and we get a 7-0 vote. Now, people are going to say it's ugly and all of that, but I agree with Bill that I don't think the judiciary should be involved in policy making. And the thought that, well, we're going to have 4 retired judges because somehow that's a better policymaker than someone who stands for office for 24 years and continues to get elected by his constituents, I don't think that is. So, you know, we can agree that, is it agree to disagree? I'm not even sure if we are disagreeing.
No, we're not disagreeing at this point.
Yeah.
You know, the thing was put together pretty quickly.
That part of it I agree with. You're right.
I remember standing outside on the Seitz smoking portico, puffing away with my friend Senator Eklund, saying, John, I don't know. And old Frank LaRose, who didn't smoke, came out and bummed a couple that night too. I said, Frank, I don't know, man. But nonetheless, when the roll was called up yonder, the vote went on. It went on the ballot. It passed. And my fear was, and it was true for a while, these liberal judges, Maureen O'Connor and her 3 crony friends up there, couldn't read the plain language of the amendment, read words into the amendment that weren't there, ignored words like attempt that were there, okay? And even when we served them up with maps that absolutely matched up with the proportional split between Republicans and Democrats in Ohio, they said, that's not good enough because you didn't make the Democrat districts Democrat enough. That's nowhere in that amendment.
Yeah.
But again, it's back to the point where we do agree. Courts were injecting themselves in the public policy determination business. They had no business doing that. And, you know, at the time we put that on the ballot, the U.S. Supreme Court had still not ruled that these questions are best left to the legislature.
Yeah. And so, I think that decision may have changed what we did and what we changed on the congressional maps.
Yes.
Also, a few years later.
True.
It's so you're sure you can't stick around a little longer?
Well, you want to create a 33rd Senate seat?
Well, somebody sent something to me in my office about having 51 Senate. I'm serious about changing the Constitution, so we'll see how far that goes. So.
Candidates, campaigns, and issues matter, and when you have good candidates who are knowledgeable, who are committed to public service, like State Representative Bill Seitz, Senate President Matt Huffman, you can get things done.
Amen.
And you can agree to disagree, but still, you get things done. Representative Seitz, great to have you on. Best of luck to you. Don't be a stranger. Maybe you can come on and host.
Well, yeah, happy to do that too.
That'd be great.
The reason I'm on is the very first day you guys announced this, I texted over to my friend Matt and I said, this is a great idea. Yeah. And he promptly texted back and says, do you want to come on? I said, well, why not? You know, it's a great idea.
He'd be a great guest host.
He would.
I'll have you back.
I'll have you talk to my agent.
Oh, all right, there you go.
State Representative
Thank
Bill
you.
Seitz.
Thank you.
President Matt Huffman, thanks for joining us. And thank you for tuning into the President's Podcast. I'm John Fortney, and we'll see you next week.